At 14, the idea of being left home alone overnight felt like the ultimate taste of freedom. My parents had just started trusting me with the responsibility, and I was determined to prove I could handle it. The rules were straightforward: don't leave the house and don't invite anyone over. For me, that was hardly a sacrifice. Being alone meant I could enjoy little luxuries that were normally off limits: blasting my music, playing video games at top volume, and relishing the rare quiet where no one was telling me to turn it down. It wasn't just about the freedom, it was the feeling of independence. The house felt different when it was all mine. I could sit wherever I wanted, stay up as late as I liked, and let time slip by without anyone interrupting. For a teenager eager to feel grown up, it was exhilarating. That night, the weather added to the atmosphere. Rain had started earlier in the evening, escalating into a full-blown thunderstorm. I loved storms. The flashes of lightning and the rumble of thunder made everything feel cozier indoors. For a while, I sat outside under the awning, watching the storm. The rhythmic sound of raindrops and the occasional crack of thunder felt calming. But as the storm grew stronger, I decided to head back inside. This was no ordinary night for gaming. I decided to take advantage of the rare opportunity to use the massive flat-screen TV in the den, coupled with my dad's Bose sound system. Typically, he didn't allow me to touch it, but since I was home alone, it was mine for the night. I carefully moved my Xbox from my room to the den, a cozy space located half a flight of stairs down from the living room, level with the backyard. The backyard door, a sliding glass one, was in the den, but I didn't think much of it as I set up my gaming station. I logged into Black Ops, the volume cranked high, and joined an online multiplayer lobby. My friend Cody was in the party chat, and we were joking around while playing. I had an old, worn-out headset that only relayed voices from other players, leaving the game audio blasting through the speakers. Despite its flaws, it was perfect for the night I had planned. I was in my element, completely immersed in the game. Hours passed, and I was utterly lost in my digital world when I was jolted back to reality by the sound of the doorbell. My heart skipped. It was after 9 p.m., far too late for someone to drop by, unannounced, confused. I told Cody, and he suggested I check it out. For a brief moment, I thought it might be my parents returning early. But then I realized they wouldn't ring the doorbell, they had their keys. An ease settled over me. I muted the game, walked upstairs to the front door, and called out, "Who's there?" A deep male voice responded, "I need to use your phone." Something about his tone made me freeze. He didn't sound panicked, lost, or like someone in genuine need. I didn't answer. Instead, I quietly crept back downstairs to the den, my mind racing. I told Cody what had happened, and his reaction mirrored my own unease. "Yo, what the expletive?" "Don't open it, man," Cody said firmly. The doorbell rang again, but I ignored it, my heart pounding. Minutes passed, and eventually the ringing stopped. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding and tried to calm myself. Whoever it was seemed to have left. Telling myself it was probably nothing, I tried to focus back on the game. Cody stayed on the line, helping to ease my nerves. Just as I was beginning to relax, I heard a faint noise to my right. I turned my head and froze. The sliding glass door to the backyard was closing, and a tall man was stepping inside. It wasn't my dad. It wasn't anyone I knew. Panic surged through me as I dropped the controller and bolted for the office, which was adjacent to the den. The man saw me and lunged toward me, but I managed to slam the office door shut and lock it just in time. The door handle jiggled violently as he tried to get in. "Open the door, kid," he said, his voice low and threatening. "I just need to use your phone." I didn't answer. I was paralyzed with fear, my back pressed against the door as I tried to think. The office had 2 doors, one leading to the den, where the intruder was, and another leading to the garage. I knew my only chance was to escape through the garage, but I hesitated. hoping he might give up. Instead, the situation escalated. The man began pounding on the door with increasing force, shouting obscenities. "Open the expletive door," he roared. I couldn't wait any longer. I sprinted to the garage door, pressed the button to open it, and crouched as the loud, clunky mechanism slowly lifted. The sound seemed deafening in the tense silence. I prayed he wouldn't hear it over the storm. As soon as the door was halfway open, I crawled under and dashed out into the rain. My neighbor Julian's house was only a few doors down. I ran as fast as I could, the storm soaking me to the bone. Copper, Julian's dog, barked as I reached the porch and rang the bell frantically. Moments later, Julian opened the door. "Help," I cried, practically collapsing into his arms. His wife appeared, alarmed by my state. Through gasps and sobs, I explained what had happened. Julian immediately called the police while his wife comforted me, assuring me I was safe. The wait for the police felt agonizingly long. When they finally arrived, Julian and I went outside to meet them. I explained everything, detailing how the man had entered through the unlocked sliding door. The officers entered the house through the garage, and after a few tense minutes, they emerged with the man in handcuffs. I stayed hidden as they questioned him. He claimed the house was his and that I was his son. His slurred speech and erratic behavior suggested he was either drunk or high. It was clear he wasn't in his right mind. After ensuring he wouldn't see me, the officers informed me that he would be taken into custody. My parents were contacted, and they rushed home. They pressed charges against the man, whose name I later learned was John McCarty. He was charged with criminal trespass and sentenced to jail time. Even so, the experience haunted me. Knowing he would one day be released and might remember where I lived was a chilling thought. Thankfully, it appeared to be a random encounter rather than a targeted break-in. But that night changed me. The sense of safety I had once felt in my home was forever altered. I never thought something truly horrifying would ever find its way into my life. I was the type of person who thrived on routine, who found solace in the everyday, the predictable. My life was ordinary, some might even call it dull. I never craved adventure or excitement, certainly not anything that could induce real fear. Instead, I satisfied my curiosity with creepy stories, online YouTube videos, and creepypasta readings. I enjoyed the adrenaline rush they gave me, the suspense and the thrills. But deep down, I always knew it was just fiction, harmless entertainment. Something like that could never cross into my reality, not in my safe, uneventful world. But everything changed that summer. It was an unusually quiet weekend when I decided to house sit for my uncle at his remote cabin near Silver Lake in Vermont. The cabin was tucked deep in the woods, miles away from the nearest neighbor, surrounded by towering pines and thick underbrush. It was the perfect place to escape from the chaos of everyday life. Uncle Richard had invited me to stay while he was away on a trip. He had warned me that the place was isolated, that the weather could change without warning, and that I should take the necessary precautions, but I wasn't worried. What could go wrong in a place like that? The storm began in the late afternoon. At first, it was just a few flashes of distant lightning and the soft rumble of thunder. The wind picked up gradually, but it didn't concern me. I had spent so many evenings at the cabin before, watching the storm roll in from the porch. I relished the way the world seemed to stop when nature raged outside. But by nightfall, the weather grew fierce, and the storm was upon us with full force. Rain slammed against the windows, and thunder crashed in deafening bursts. The wind howled through the trees like some kind of restless creature, groaning and screeching against the walls. The power flickered once and then went out completely. I wasn't surprised this happened often in the area during storms. I lit a few candles, grabbed a blanket, and curled up on the couch. I opened Reddit on my phone and began scrolling. The howling wind outside made it hard to focus, but I did my best. It was the kind of cozy night you look forward to on a stormy evening. The sound of the wind and rain only added to the sense of being tucked away from the world, safe and warm. But I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was off. It was the kind of feeling you get when you're aware that you're alone in a place that's too quiet, and your mind begins playing tricks on you. By midnight, I started to feel drowsy. I shut my phone off, set it on the nightstand, and snuggled under the covers. As the rain continued to hammer the cabin, I drifted into a deep sleep, my body wrapped in the warmth of the blanket. But sometime later, I was jolted awake. It was freezing. The cold hit me like a slap in the face, and I immediately sat up in bed, shivering uncontrollably. I could see my breath in the dark room. The wind outside had intensified, and it felt as if it had somehow infiltrated the walls. My throat was dry, like sandpaper. I reached for my phone to turn on the flashlight and groggily swung my legs over the edge of the bed. The floorboards creaked underfoot, cold against my bare skin. As I stepped into the hallway, the air felt even colder. The living room was bathed in an eerie silence, the only sound being the relentless howling wind outside. My heartbeat quickened, but I rationalized it away. Maybe it was just the storm. Maybe there was a draft somewhere in the house. Then I noticed that the back door was wide open. The sliding glass door to the patio, which I was sure I had closed before going to bed, was now ajar. Cold air poured into the cabin. The rain had stopped, but the wind was still fierce. I froze in place. My heart skipped a beat. I felt a wave of panic wash over me, my breath becoming shallow. I stood there for a moment, staring at the door, trying to think logically. Had I somehow left it open? Had Uncle Richard forgotten to lock it before he left? I didn't know. I couldn't be sure. But something deep inside of me whispered that I wasn't alone. My hands trembled as I walked across the room and closed the door, locking it securely. But my senses were on high alert now. The feeling that I was being watched made my skin crawl. My stomach twisted into knots as I walked quickly back to my room, locking the door behind me. I moved the chair in front of the door for extra security just in case. My mind raced with possibilities, trying to rationalize what had happened. Maybe I had just been too tired to remember if I'd closed it. But the nagging feeling didn't go away. I couldn't shake it. I climbed back into bed, trying to convince myself that everything was fine. But my mind wouldn't let me relax. I kept hearing noises, soft creaks from somewhere in the house. It was the wind, I told myself, but it felt different. My heart raced in my chest. Then I heard the faintest scratching sound. It came from beneath my bed. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The sound was subtle, almost too quiet to hear, but unmistakable. Something was under my bed. I wasn't sure what to do. I wasn't sure I even wanted to know. But my curiosity and fear won out. Slowly, I leaned over the side of the bed and shone my flashlight toward the floor. And that's when I saw her. A woman. Her skin was pale, almost sickly white, stretched tight over her bones. Her hair hung in wet, tangled clumps around her face. Her eyes were wide, bloodshot, and unblinking, and her mouth, it was wide open in a grotesque, inhuman grin. Her yellow teeth were jagged, like broken shards of bone. I could see the veins in her neck bulging, the skin almost translucent. For what felt like an eternity, she stared at me. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. My body was frozen in terror. And then she laughed a high-pitched, bone-chilling cackle that echoed in my skull. It wasn't human. It sounded like something ancient, something wrong. I scrambled out of bed, my legs shaking, my heart pounding in my chest. I bolted for the door, dragging the chair away in a frantic panic. I ran down the hall, my breath coming in shallow gasps, and banged on my uncle's door. "Uncle Richard. Someone's in the house," I screamed. He burst out of the room almost immediately, holding a shotgun I didn't even know he owned. Together we rushed back to my room, but by the time we got there, she was gone. The window was wide open, rainwater pooling on the floor. We could see the dark forest through the window, but she was nowhere to be found. Outside, we caught a glimpse of something moving in the distance. A pale figure, her sickly white skin glowing in the moonlight, disappearing into the woods. My uncle fired a warning shot into the air, but she didn't stop. We stayed up the rest of the night, keeping watch, checking every room, every closet. We didn't speak, but we both knew something was terribly wrong. In the morning, there was no sign of her, no trace that anyone had been there at all. But we knew better. We could feel it in our bones. Someone had been in that house. We stayed in the cabin for one more night, but it wasn't the same. Every creak in the floorboards, every gust of wind made my heart race. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still out there, watching, waiting. The storm had passed, but my nightmares were just beginning. The rain hit me like needles as I hurried down the street, the sky above a dark mass, swelling with an approaching storm. I pulled my collar up, shivering not just from the cold, but from the unsettling feeling crawling up my spine. The office had been quiet today, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like something's about to happen, like the world is holding its breath. I glanced up, the first crack of thunder splitting the sky. The air was thick, charged, as if the storm wasn't just weather but a warning. I turned the corner, spotting my building in the distance home. Just a little further, and I'd be inside, away from whatever strange feeling had settled in my chest. But then I saw it. The figure. Across the street, barely visible against the backdrop of the rain. I stopped, narrowing my eyes, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It wasn't a person, not really. It was taller, and though the streetlights were flickering, I could see the form standing unnaturally still in the shadows. Its posture was wrong, too stiff, like it wasn't quite human. I rubbed my eyes, the rain blurring my vision. I wasn't sure if it was the storm messing with me or something else, but when I looked back, the figure hadn't moved. And yet, something felt terribly off. My instincts screamed at me to move, to get home. I turned on my heel and started walking faster, pushing through the rain as if I could outrun the feeling growing behind me. The wind howled, tugging at my clothes, as though urging me to go faster. My pulse quickened, and I heard a sound behind me, footsteps, slow and deliberate, in rhythm with my own. I stopped. The sound didn't stop. I spun around, my heart pounding in my chest, my breath sharp in my throat. There, across the street, the figure was closer now. Too close. How had it moved so quickly? It was no longer standing still. It was walking toward me, its limbs unnaturally long and stiff, its head tilted at an odd angle. The flickering streetlights cast strange shadows on its face, and for a moment I thought I saw its eyes dark, hollow, staring directly at me. A jolt of panic shot through me. I couldn't stand here anymore. I turned and ran. My feet pounded against the pavement, my heart thumping in my chest like it was trying to escape. The sound of footsteps behind me quickened, matching my pace. Closer, closer. I pushed harder, desperate to reach the safety of my front door. The storm raged around me, but the figure's presence felt louder, closer, consuming everything. My apartment building was right there. Just a few more steps. I could almost taste the relief. I reached the door, my hand shaking as I fumbled for my keys, the storm drenching me. Just as I turned the key, I heard the sound again, the footsteps, too close now, right behind me. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my breath ragged, my back pressed against the cold wood as I stood there, heart racing. The house was silent now, save for the roar of the storm outside. I didn't move. I couldn't. But even in the safety of my own home, I knew something had followed me inside. It was still out there, still waiting.